and welcome to ICRA's webinar on Indian commercial vehicle industry. Mr. Shamsher Diwan, Group Head and VP Corporate Ratings, along with his team, will take you through the presentation. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session with the participants. Over to you, Shamsher.
Thank you, Anju. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ICRA's webinar on the electric bus segment. The automotive industry globally is undergoing major technological changes. Electrification of powertrains is just one of them. Now, the debate has clearly shifted from whether vehicles will turn electric to when and at what pace. While major markets led by China and Europe have taken a considerable lead in the EV overall system, India too has started its journey in a modest manner, backed by a series of policy initiatives and private sector investments. However, India is unique in many ways. Unlike other markets, nearly 80% of mobility requirements in India are met through two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and buses. In addition, lack of adequate infrastructure, tough operating environment, and very price-cautious customer base sets us apart. Accordingly, we believe that the construct of India's EV ecosystem is likely to be very different in many ways as compared to the rest of the world. Our presentation today is part of the knowledge series on the EV segment, which had started in May. While in our first presentation, we had talked about the complete EV landscape emerging in India, our presentation today focuses on the emerging opportunities in the electric bus segment. At ICRA, we feel that electric buses present a sizable opportunity after electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and private sector will be at the forefront of driving such investments. To discuss the opportunity and some of the emerging trends, we will have a presentation from my colleagues, Sri Kumar Krishnamurthy, Rohan Gupta, and Shruti Thomas, and we'll follow it up with a Q&A and panel discussion with our esteemed panel. Unfortunately, Ms. Mahua Acharya, Managing Director and CEO of Convergence Energy Systems Limited, Government of India, could not make it because of some last-minute exigencies. But let me introduce to you my other panel members. Today, we have with us Mr. B. Srinivas. He is the Senior Vice President at Volvo Eicher Commercial Vehicles and also the co-chair for SIAM's Economic Research Group and its executive committee member since 2015. A mechanical engineer by profession, Srinivas has over 25 years of rich experience in VECV in various different roles, including strategy, sales and marketing, supply chain management, and product development. We also have with us today Mr. Sumit Mittal. Sumit is the Chief Financial Officer of Green Cell Mobility, a company which is funded by Green Growth Equity Fund. As some of you would know, Green Cell is one of the early entrants in the EV bus segment, both in the SRTU space, as well as now making inroads into the private intercity segment. Sumit has over 15 years of experience in project and corporate finance. In his previous role, he was Senior President and Regional Business Head at Yes Bank. And during his stint, he has managed a book of over 40,000 crores and underwritten some of the large projects across various infrastructure space, including ports, roads, shipping, and renewables. Last but not the least, let me also introduce to you Mr. Deepak Jain. Deepak represents one of the vital pillars of the ecosystem, which is lending, an area which we feel will play a very important role in meeting government's stated targets of EV adoption. Deepak has over 20 years of experience in project finance, deal structuring, and resource mobilization. He has been instrumental in execution of various innovative projects in the finance sector. As the head of new business, he is currently responsible for formulation of lending policies and taking forward PFC's lending initiatives in new business areas. On behalf of ICRA, I would like to thank all of you for taking out time for this conference. We really look forward to your insights on a very interesting and emerging area, and I'm sure the audience will greatly benefit from this session today. So without any further delay, I'll request my colleague Shruti to make a brief presentation on what we think about the EV bus segment in India. So over to you, Shruti.
Yes, thank you, Shamsher. In today's presentation, we'll give an overview of the electric bus market, starting with the global scenario and how India is electrifying its bus fleet. We will also dwell in some detail on the opportunities, risk, and some mitigating factors we see in the public-private partnership or GCC model of operations, as we call it, which is emerging as the favorable route for electric buses by SRTOs in India. We will finally conclude our presentation with ICRA's outlook on the segment. Let us start with the global landscape first. So now it is a well-accepted fact that the world is at the cusp of a mobility revolution, moving towards automobiles which are shared, connected, and more importantly, zero emission. Given that controlling pollution levels is far bigger a challenge in cities globally, electrification of public transport has been one of the levers in the hands of governments to control emissions and to meet their stated climate goals. However, if you look at the situation now, the penetration levels are globally low, except for China, which started on its EV journey much more in advance. Nevertheless, a secular pickup is visible in other geographies, more notably USA, Europe, and even in India now, and this is expected to further increase going forward, given the growing emphasis on moving towards zero emissions and on carbon neutrality. China is the only major economy worldwide that has implemented large-scale electrification of city buses. As you can see from the graph on the left, today it accounts for more than 98% of the electric bus fleet and 95% of the dedicated bus charges. China witnessed increased adoption of e-buses over the 2015 to 2017 period, when the government offered significant subsidies in order to spur the EV sales. Although, as you can see in the right, that the number of new e-bus registrations in China have been on a declining trend from 2016 onwards, because the subsidies that were on offer were gradually phased out, and there was an overall decline in the bus market. But even then, you can see that the bus fleets in many Chinese cities today are near fully electrified. A case in point here is the city of Shenzhen, which has China's and the world's first and fully electric bus fleet. It began adopting electric buses way back in the year 2009, and in less than 8 years, that is by 2017, it became the first city in the world that had fully electrified its urban transit fleet, comprising of more than 16,000 buses. So what really has propelled China to the forefront of the EV race? The government, of course, is one of the major building blocks here, and through various support measures and policies has been instrumental in this large-scale adoption. In the initial phase of adoption, there were significant subsidies on offer, both at the national level as well as local level, and in some cases, these accounted for even 60% of bus procurement costs. Additionally, a widespread charging infrastructure was set up, aided by subsidies, as well as concerted efforts by various stakeholders to resolve the bottlenecks that came along, such as land availability. The government had also laid out a clear roadmap, wherein certain cities imposed restrictions on polluting vehicles, multiple areas were earmarked as green zones, etc. And all of this ultimately mandated the adoption of cleaner vehicles. The concerns on technological reliability and the supply chain were also addressed in the initial years through collaborative approaches with the OEMs. So some of the OEMs even offered lifetime warranties during the course of the project, etc. And all of these helped to alleviate concerns. As a result of all these factors together, China today has emerged as the largest EV manufacturing hub globally. Even as China continued to succeed, the adoption in other major automobile markets like USA and Europe remained relatively low. However, it is now picking up, as you can see, given the increased concerns on air pollution. And here, one of the regions that is emerging as the clear forerunner is Europe. There's the Paris Climate Agreement in place and other initiatives like European Clean Bus Deployment Initiative, etc. And over the past couple of years, we have seen adoption in Europe also increase. So there are certain countries there also like Netherlands, UK, France, and Germany, which are the clear forerunners here. In North America, if you see, there were around 580 odd new electric bus registrations in 2020, primarily led by USA. And here also, e-bus deployment is primarily driven by policies in the state of California, which is the location of the bulk of the current e-bus. But despite these encouraging trends, what we see is that e-bus adoption still has a long way to go, accounting for currently a negligible proportion of the total global e-bus fleet. It is around 16% if you include China, and if you exclude China, which is the bulk of the stock, then the current penetration is less than 1% on a global level. But in terms of new bus sales, the trends are still encouraging. Over the last 2 years, around 6% of global bus sales have been contributed by electric buses, even if you exclude China. In the second section, we'll touch upon the evolving e-bus market in India, including various measures in place to support its adoption. To encourage EV adoption in India, the government over the years has introduced multiple programs. Among all, the Scheme for Fast Adoption and Manufacturing of Electric Vehicles in India, or FAME as it's more commonly called, is the flagship scheme. The scheme identified public transportation and commercial fleet segment as the initial drivers of electrification in the country. Right now, the second phase is ongoing, and there's an outlay of rupees 100 billion that is planned. It was initially planned for 3 years, and it has been recently extended for another 2 years as well. And this is planned to increase EV penetration. There are a number of other initiatives also in place, such as smart city projects and EV policies announced by select states. And all of these outline electrification of commercial fleet as one of their key objectives. Considering EVs, the government offers capital to the tune of rupees 35 to 55 lakh per bus, or up to 40% of the bus cost, in order to bridge the upfront cost differential. Of the total outlay of rupees 100 billion that we had told for FAME 2, 35% is earmarked for electric buses. Apart from the central government, many states in India have also come out with their own EV policies, as you would have seen over the past few months. Majorly, the focus of these policies have been on the E2-wheeler and the E3-wheeler segments, but many states have also announced specific targets for e-bus adoption as well. But what is to be noted here is that many of the state policies do not offer any additional capital subsidies for electric buses as such, but they are offering relaxation in some of the exemption or registration fees or road taxes or some preferential rates for EV charging, etc. So all of these would also indirectly act as levers supporting the e-bus adoption. So given these measures, what we have seen is that the penetration of e-buses in India is gradually picking up, with around 350 to 400 odd units sold in FY21, and a similar number already clocked in 4 months of this fiscal. But there is significant ground to be covered, even with all of these subsidy schemes in place. Even under FAME 2, if you see, it's been almost 2.5 years post implementation, but only 16% of the buses, sanctioned buses, have been deployed, and around half of the buses are yet to be bidded out also. So this might be partially on account of the pandemic-induced challenges over the past one and a half years, and the scheme has been recently extended by another 2 years to factor in the same. But we would still need to move quickly as a country to emerge as a reasonable player in the e-bus market. Now we'll talk about the operating model that is gaining preference and ICRA's view on its operating economics, the associated risk, and mitigation strategies. Broadly speaking, there are two main operating models that exist for the procurement of buses by SRTUs. One, of course, is the outright purchase model, wherein the SRTU themselves procures the buses from the OEM and operates them. The second is the gross cost contract model, wherein a third party, usually from the private sector, purchases the buses and operates them on behalf of the SRTU. The SRTU, in turn, pays charges on a per kilometer basis to such operators for the distance that is operated by them. And the SRTU is also responsible for the revenue collection on these routes. On the other hand, the ownership, the maintenance, and overall responsibility for the buses as such rests with the operator. And this model is gaining increased prominence now, especially because FAME 2 offers subsidies only for the buses which are procured under these routes. The immediate benefit for the SRTO is that they do not have to incur the significant upfront capital costs associated with onboarding a large fleet of electric buses. And secondly, they also do not bear the technology risk associated with the new age product. On the other hand, the operators do not bear the traffic risk and they get paid an annuity amount as long as the buses are available and running. Now let us take a look at the operating economics of e-buses vis-a-vis conventional buses. As you can see, the upfront cost of e-buses is considerably higher than that of diesel or CNG counterparts, even after incorporating the subsidy element. But what makes them really viable is that their running costs are significantly lower. With per kilometer fuel costs about 3 to 5 times lower than that of conventional diesel buses or CNG buses, the operational savings, as you can see, are significant. Furthermore, diesel prices are steadily inching upwards on one hand, and states are offering subsidized electricity tariffs for charging EVs on the other hand. So this gap in operating costs is only likely to widen going forward. In terms of the total cost of ownership also, electric buses compare favorably with conventional buses. Although operating costs get pushed upwards by the battery replacement costs and for buses, it still remains favorable. Capital costs are currently higher, but the subsidy element offered by various schemes is kind of addressing this. And overall, with the subsidies in effect, e-buses, in our estimate, could offer around 20 to 30% potential savings vis-a-vis diesel buses. While the total cost of ownership may be comparable with CNG buses, the environmental concerns and overall push by the government for electrification is likely to favor electric buses. Nevertheless, ICRA believes that e-buses and CNG buses are likely to coexist as clean modes of transport over the near future, and e-buses would probably gain share once next level of emission norms are implemented. The major project cost element for these GCC projects is the bus cost, which, as you can see from the graph on the left, accounts for around 80% of the project costs. Capital subsidies fund a large part of these, which can range anywhere between 25 to 45% of the project costs, depending on the bus type. And accordingly, the debt and the equity components for these are lower, which supports the overall viability of these projects. This would be in contrast to other infrastructure projects, which generally have very high debt burden. In terms of the operating economics for the bus operator, what we have seen so far is that operating margins are typically high, around 35 to 40%, to account for the high capital costs. And here, what the operators are trying to do to minimize the variability in their cash flows is to enter into fixed price or back-to-back arrangements with OEMs and other service providers, so that their costs are kind of locked in terms of maintenance costs or employee costs, etc. Electricity costs is the other major element, around 10 to 15%. And that is also either passed on to the SRTO, that is reimbursed by them, or it is taken care of when the revenues are reset at a defined frequency. So overall, what we believe is that the return and coverage indicators for these projects are expected to be comfortable once they achieve stable operations. Over this slide and the next, we are trying to outline some of the key risks for the projects from the SPV standpoint and some of the risk mitigation measures that are in place currently. However, the model is still in nascent stages and would evolve over time. Like any other project, these projects are also exposed to risks of time and cost overruns. Fixed price contracts with the OEM for the buses reduces the risk of cost overruns significantly, as the bus cost accounts for around 80% of the project costs, as we saw. Also, having back-to-back arrangements for recovering any penalties for late delivery of the buses from the OEMs is another mitigant that is being used. Some SPV promoters, it may be OEMs or it may be some stronger third parties also, they even provide undertakings for funding such cost overruns, which protects the credit profile of the projects. The other risk that can impact the project execution is the ability to achieve financial closure, especially because these SPVs would be recently set up and having no track record as such. Here, having some strong promoter backing with adequate capability to bring in the necessary equity, etc., remains paramount. Projects where promoters have brought in equity in a timely manner or have been able to get sanctioned debt facilities are obviously viewed more favorably. Another big element is the subsidy, which is to be received in three tranches, 20% on signing the agreement, 40% on the bus delivery, and 40% 6 months post the COD. While track record of subsidy receipt is something which is yet to be established, at least what we have seen for most of the projects in the execution phase, the first tranche of the subsidy has been disbursed on time. In terms of the risk on geopolitical developments, that is something that remains an event risk, especially with key components like batteries coming in from foreign entities. But force majeure conditions in the concession agreement would typically cover for such eventualities. In terms of risk during the operation phase, the risk that the bus is not available as per requirements is the key risk, as the SPV can face revenue loss or some penalties because of this. So what the SPVs are doing to mitigate this risk is also having back-to-back arrangements with the OEM, such that any penalties for bus underperformance is recovered from the OEM. Additionally, they are also maintaining spare buses, which can act as a buffer. The other key operational risk is that battery cost and performance may not be in line with expectation. And batteries are expected to be replaced every 5 to 6 years. And if the cost of the battery is finally much higher than what was initially envisaged, that can also affect the project viability. So SPVs are even locking in the battery prices upfront for the part that is to be replaced even 5 to 6 years in advance. For reducing variability on maintenance cost, fixed price AMC contracts are used. And revenue risks in general for these projects are offset by the take-or-pay nature of the contracts, but we'll still need to see the rate at which the projects are getting bidded out vis-a-vis the actual cost of ownership, because that can also impact the viability. Counterparty risk, as in all projects, remains significant here also. However, escrow mechanism in place that is mandated under the concession agreement with around 2 to 3 months of revenue payable remains a comfort. Additionally, many projects also have other state mechanisms in place, like viability gap funding or certain earmarks specifically for this purpose, and that offers further comfort regarding the counterparty's ability to maintain or honor its obligations. We'll move to the last section, which covers our outlook on the e-bus segment in India. Among the various automotive segments, buses are expected to be among those that would witness faster electrification, especially on the intracity operations. While limited charging infrastructure, range anxiety, and high capital costs have been the key deterrents in the passenger car segment, these are not very major concerns for the e-bus segment as such. We already saw that the TCOs furthermore, charging infrastructure for buses are localized at the depots and can be easily set up. And the current range is also within the typical daily running. So it would be moving on an overnight charging system, and this alleviates range anxiety overall. Accordingly, we believe that the e-bus segment would witness increasing penetration over the near to medium term, reaching around 8 to 10% by FY 2025. While initially the FAME 2 scheme and associated subsidies will support the penetration, but going forward, capital costs would reduce with the reduction in battery prices and localization, and that can get going forward. That said, there remain some roadblocks for execution. One upfront, the lack of track record, and that remains a concern, especially when it comes to financing options. Additionally, land and depot availability, setting up electricity connections, all of these have been some of the on-ground challenges. Furthermore, with the current range capabilities and limited charging network, current applications would be largely concentrated in the intracity routes, while intercity will see a more of a gradual adoption. The relatively high capital cost and stressed SRTU finances also remain a sort of impediment for funding large bus orders, but the GCC model kind of offsets this. So many of the government support measures, including GCC model, have been aimed at addressing these challenges. In terms of the positive factors aiding e-bus adoption, the key would be the savings that we already touched upon. Additionally, the segment does not require a widespread public charging infrastructure due to the requirement of a largely localized charging infrastructure, and this can be easily set up at the local depots. In India, OEMs have adopted different approaches towards EV development. Some OEMs like Tata Motors and Volvo Eicher have focused on developing the technology in-house. But what we have seen is that the approach adopted by most OEMs is to enter into collaborations with some foreign players who already have the e-bus technology readily available with them. Hence, access to technology is not likely to be a major deterrent for e-bus adoption in the country. Most of the e-bus manufacturing currently is limited to assembly operations given the low bus volumes. But many OEMs are also increasing their localization, and this is also something that is mandated under the FAME 2 scheme. The government is even pushing for local manufacturing of battery cells through the PLI scheme, which was announced last year. Nevertheless, we are likely to depend on imported battery cells at least over the next 2 to 3 years. Currently, the key target segment for e-buses is the intra-city segment operated by SRTUs, given the current range and charging network. But over time, with the operational economics of e-buses, this would prompt private players also to adopt it. For large-scale adoption in interstate segment, confidence has to increase with regard to charging infrastructure as well as the range of the buses. Adoption in the school and staff carrier segments would be still some time away because the daily running distance for these segments is not very high, which limits the operational savings. But over time, as the capital cost reduces organically, the penetration in these segments would also increase. To sum up, we'll leave you with the key takeaways from this presentation. While currently China remains the world #1 in EV and e-bus adoption, other geographies like India have started to play catch up. Multiple policies and schemes have been introduced in India as well to incentivize EV sales, and e-bus is a major focus area. FAME is the flagship scheme, and its second phase is ongoing. And this offers capital subsidy only for the GCC model of operations. And accordingly, this model is witnessing increased adoption over the past couple of years. Although Niti Aayog has outlined a model concession agreement for these projects, keeping in mind the interests of various stakeholders, it still remains to be seen how various risks related to project execution, bus performance, receivables, etc., play out over the near to medium term. Nevertheless, as the model matures and with the expected favorable cost economics, electric buses would witness increased adoption going forward. With this in our presentation, I will hand back over to Shamsher for taking it over from here.
Thank you, Shruti, for a very comprehensive presentation. Now, before we get into the panel discussion, may I request the audience to please share your questions in the Q&A chat box that you see at the bottom of your screen. So let me start with Mr. Srinivas. As an OEM, the natural preference is to go for outright sale of vehicles. However, what we have seen is that there is a trend wherein CV OEMs are also participating in tenders. Now, given the experience OEMs have had, in the past in this segment over the years, what, in your view, is the right strategy to really approach the electric bus segment in India?
Thank you, Shamsher. Thank you all for this discussion. See, I think you said rightly, OEMs, when you talk about a technology absorption, whenever the technology changes, not only in the EVs, in the case of BS6, I think I just remind all of you, we were the fastest to adopt BS6 as a country. Now we migrated within a span of 3 years from BS4 to BS6 by skipping BS5. So that way, I think OEMs are traditionally used to work on technology part of it. When you talk about investments, we all invest on basically the technology absorption or manufacturing excellence and quality and all these areas. So when this change happened, I think we'll discuss about the change part of it. When the change happened from the capex buying to GCC, I think the OEMs were supposed to extend their learning curve towards the front end part of it. Like they have to manage the fleet and they have to manage a lot of things. So that has actually become the additional learning for OEMs. However, I personally believe that is the way the world is evolving, not only in EVs. When you talk about the disruptions, the 4 disruptions which are going to shape the world, when popularly we all say case, connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. So all these 4 are interlinked. So the going forward, truck as a service, bus as a service is something which is inevitable in future. I think probably this GCC model has enabled us to practice it before we enter into the era. So, but what has been a challenge for us is the learning part of it. Second has been, even though we were giving the the annual maintenance contracts or on-site supports. But this model talks about a more comprehensive way of taking care of customer interest. In terms of as a simple activity like a cleaning of a bus to a changing of a tire and the battery charging and the battery replacement. So everything. Probably this is a great opportunity for us to get prepared for the future. Meanwhile, at this point of time, yes, the change has been the kind of a challenge to start with, and which has helped us to walk towards it. And I'm very sure, I think not only ourselves, and all OEMs will catch up very soon on this.
So what you're saying is that initially OEMs will participate through, the GCC route and perhaps look at bringing in strategic partners later on, to really conserve capital.
The two parts of it. So as far as technology is concerned, yes, back-end activities will continue the way they were happening. But as far as the front end is concerned, probably there will be a lot of collaboration will happen in terms of the new generation operators and the startup ecosystem. All they will be leveraged. And as far as finance is concerned, definitely that is also in another collaboration area. So I think the EVs will teach us in the starting of the discussion we are talking. I think this EV will teach us our need to be much more collaborative than in the past. So I'm very sure. I think this will make us to a great success story once you leverage all parts of the ecosystem.
Understand. Sumit, if I can, come to you now. China has taken a significant lead in the EV space globally, and we saw in the presentation also that some of the cities in China have become almost 100% electric as far as their bus fleets or commercial fleets are concerned. Now, as an organization, that is trying to create a large-scale platform for operating electric buses in India, what, in your view, are some of the areas where we can replicate from China's success, and what are the things that we need to do differently in India?
Thank you, Shamsher. I think a very relevant question in terms of looking at China, because 98% of the electric buses that we talk about in the world are in China. So they've done some things right. The first being they've started this activity way back in 2009, and it's been last 10 years that they've made these strides towards electrification of their fleet. Right? And what they've done is they initiated with a very innovative concept of identifying 10 cities with 1,000 buses each. So that was their first step, right? The first program, which was supremely successful in China, was to identify 10 cities and get them with 1,000 buses each. Right? What I feel is unless and until there is a certain critical mass and inertia which is created in any sector, right? Till then, the sector will not become self-sustaining and kind of will not thrive. Right? So what China did was that it provided subsidies, not just limited to government sector, but across. So, for example, in our case, FAME 2 is restricted to only STUs where the subsidies are provided, right? But if our objective is electrification of fleet, why not school buses, right? Or why not maybe B2B buses, or why not intercity buses, right? At the end of the day, it will lead to a situation where more and more buses are electrified. And whether it is a private operator or it's a government operator, anybody who buys electric buses should be able to kind of get this subsidies. This will create an ecosystem of trained resources, trained technical staff. It will create a value chain for spare parts, and it will create an adoption. Now let's talk about FAME 2, right? It's been almost there for now 3 years. Right? Hardly 10 to 15% of the funds which have been allocated for 3,500 crores have been utilized. Right? So I always believe that government should be in the business of coming up with policy measures, governance standards, and a watchdog kind of role, right? And let the business be done by the business houses. That's the way any adoption has kind of really picked up the pace. Case in point is vaccination of COVID. When the government was the implementing agencies, the way the vaccination was done, and when it became open to the private sector, it kind of really picked up the pace. So I think Government should provide the broad rules of the game. The government should provide the governance standards, right? And that's when the private sector should be brought in to create that initial momentum. And once the government feels that, okay, these sectors have become now self-sustainable, that's when these subsidies should taper down the way China has done beautifully, right? So I think that's the mantra for success in China, and I think we should replicate same to them, actually.
So one of the key learnings from China, as you said, is that you should be focused on not just one segment, but just open up the market for all segments, not restrict yourself, so that you can create a complete ecosystem in a very short time span. And that itself then becomes, rather it goes into an autopilot mode, and it helps, in creating a market by itself.
Yeah, so just two things I want to add. One is that concentrated approach, right? They did not go for 50 cities. They went for 10 cities, right? So there is a concentration of resources, right? Optimization of resources which happened. Second was that there was no restriction in terms of private public kind of a thing, right? In India has close to 20 lakh buses, right? The government owns less than 2 lakh buses, right? So focusing on 10% of the segment and trying to achieve that versus approaching a 20 lakh segment and achieving a 7,000 buses target is far more plausible, and it would create a lot of interest in the OEM ecosystem, in the after sales ecosystem, right? Today, with 300 buses across country, I don't think so it's any material business for any OEM, or for that matter, any service provider, right? But the moment this becomes a 7,000 number or a 10,000 number, then we will have the best of OEMs focusing on this and kind of putting their capital behind where the business is, right? So that's my 2 points on this.
Sure, I think that's a very interesting point that you've raised. I think that creating optimization of resources is very critical. Deepak, if I can come to you now, in India, automobile sector relies very heavily on financing options available, and especially when it comes to commercial vehicles, over 90-95% of vehicles are actually financed. Now, as a lender, when you approach your credit risk committees with projects in the EV bus segment, what are the key risks that get discussed, and are most important from a lender's perspective, and how do you look at mitigating some of them to a best extent possible?
Yeah, thank you, Shamshed. See, in a sunrise industry, financing is always a big challenge. And like any infrastructure projects, electric vehicle projects also have a lot of risk. But here, since we are talking about electric vehicle, I will just zero down on some of the risks which are very specific to electric vehicles. So one risk which is quite prominent, which is always talked about in any credit committee, is the counterparty payment risk. Since in an infrastructure project, we always deal with a government entity, and it all depends on the financial strength of that entity. It depends on whether we'll get the payment on time, or we will face power sector like situation where there will be mounting receivables. So in this case also, we are going to in GCC contract also, we are going to deal with relatively weak entities in the form of state transport undertakings, which do not have good credit ratings in the market. So somehow some kind of mitigation or some kind of credit enhancement needs to be built in here, so that lenders are comfortable that the money which is being billed will be received on time. Secondly, since this is a sunrise sector and the experience is very limited, so in the eyes of lender, the next important risk is the technological risk. Because here there is the element of recurring capex also, which needs to be done periodically, generally in a period of 4 to 5 years. Then these batteries do not have operational history, especially in Indian conditions where temperature is high, road conditions are very different from abroad. There are huge traffic jams, there will be overcrowding in buses. So how will be the operational performance of these buses in Indian conditions seems to be a thing of worry for the lenders. So, but we are not so worried about the replacement of battery, because we are seeing battery costs are continuously coming down. So if a battery needs to be replaced after 4 to 5 years, and the amount of cost as a percentage of project cost will be around 20 to 25% after every 5 years. So we can always have some kind of reserve built in through cash flows, through which we can fund this capex. See, the third important point which I would like to highlight is, see, in any infrastructure project, the mother document, or we call it concession agreement, makes or breaks the infrastructure projects. So that mother document needs to be balanced, and it should allocate the risk to the right party. Rights and duties of all the parties should be very well defined. Though the first document which has come to surface in this sector has been made by Niti Aayog, and I must compliment them that it is a very good first document which has come in the sector. But since it's a sector where learning will keep on happening, and not much financing has happened on that document, there are a lot of rooms for improvement in that document. And I think there is a second second draft document which may come out soon, which is being managed by ESL. So, but there are certain issues in those documents which needs to be addressed. I can just highlight a few important issues. First one is the escrow account. See, in that document, there is a provision for escrow account, which seems to be escrow account, but it is actually a mix of the escrow account and the trust and retention account, which is maintained by the lender. So actually, in the aim to give comfort to the lenders, I think the escrow agreement clause has not come out nicely. So it needs some bit of improvement, because there will be a lot of operational challenges in implementing that escrow cover. Secondly, see, lenders always look for security, especially creation of physical security through mortgage, hypothecation, assignment and all. So that document doesn't allow for assignment of the bus operator agreement, and there has to be a separate substitution agreement which needs to be signed. Even the escrow agreement can't be assigned to the lenders. Lender can't be a party to the escrow agreement. Thirdly, there is some doubt about though the termination clause is fabulous. It provides for a 90% kind of payment of debt due to the lenders, even in case of termination by operator. So that is a wonderful clause. But since in this particular document there is a provision of a bank guarantee, and this bank guarantee generally is provided by a bank, but the finance may be given by an institution like PFC or any non-bank which cannot provide a bank guarantee. So there is a component of letter of credit, letter of comfort, which is used to get the bank guarantee. So the life of this bank guarantee is basically 5 years. And this 5 years seems to be too long a period, though we can understand that the intention of having this BG is to make sure that scarce fiscal resources are put to good use, and the subsidy get channeled into the bus, and bus should be operated on the road. But having a life of 5 years, when the concession agreement itself is for 10 years, it's like 50% of the life of the concession agreement, is probably too long a period. And we can take examples from other sectors like highway and even hydro projects. There the provisions of BGs are not there. So maybe we can have a relook on the timing of this, on the tenure of this BG, and the quantum of BG. So in the termination clause, there is a provision that 90% of the debt due will be paid, but it is not clear whether the LOC or the BG amount will be included in the debt due. So this is a matter of grave concern for the lender, especially who's using the LOC as well as the cash support. So these are the basic improvements which can be done in that concession agreement. So basically, to summarize, number 1, payment risk; number 2, technological risk; and number 3, the contractual risk in the form of improvements in concession agreement.
Sure. I think that's very interesting. Sumit, if I can come to you now, Deepak talked about the number 1 risk as the counterparty risk, right? And we all know that, the SRTUs in India do not have great financial strength per se. As an operator, how do you look at that risk, and are there any innovative solutions which are available today, which can bring in more private sector participation and, take care of this kind of risk? I think you're on mute, Sumit.
I think what the Deepak Jain said on the risk, I think it's a very real risk. All these counterparties, with an exception of the few, are sub-investment grade. Right? So clearly, that is something that we struggle whenever we are dealing with finances. Right? And to mitigate this risk, one solution which can be very well offered by the state transport corporations is the collection of revenue in the escrow account. Right? So it partially mitigates the risk. In the intra-city segment, it's around 30% of the bidded amount. So 30% of the monies that are expected to come from the STUs will come from the cash flows generated out of the collection. Right? So this is one way of partially mitigating it. Some concession agreements have this clause. Some concession agreements do not have this clause. Right? So I think that is something for the Niti Aayog or now CESL to kind of ensure compliance of the model concession agreement. Second is also, as a solution to this problem, there has to be some kind of a payment guarantee mechanism. We can take a clue from maybe an NHAI or a SECI kind of project, right? Where again, instead of relying on the state discoms, there is a central authority which kind of comes as a tri-party agreement or a signatory to the concession agreement and provides the payment guarantee. Right. So this could completely change the dynamics of such a financing coming out. Right? For example, if let's assume an authority like CSL or maybe any other authority like SECI could kind of step in and provide a payment security, right? That could kind of substantially increase the comfort most of the lenders have, and it will reduce the payment risk. Right? Other things which have been kind of being ideated at various points of time is state guarantees. Right? For example, if a project is STU is a 100% owned subsidiary of the state, right? So it is only but fair to ensure that the state gives a state guarantee or to support the payment one. And if there can be a gazette notification to identify a identified cash flow which can come into maybe a reserve which can be only used for this purpose, this will significantly improve the bankability of these projects. Right? Now, what is happening is only the top few OEMs, right? iShare is one of them, and maybe Tata or maybe some of the other ones, right? Large OEMs, or maybe operators like us who are kind of having sovereign backing in terms of government of India or government of UK. Those kind of funds are invested with us. Right? So these are the these are the counterparties who are able to raise financing in the market. Right? Otherwise, standalone, the concession agreement that we talk about with the counterparties that we have, there is hardly a chance that any lender will be able to finance it. Right? But if you want to achieve a scale, we need to have a concession agreement and a structure that allows wider participation, right? Because that's when we will be able to build a scale, right? If we have 100 concessions of 100 buses each, right? That's when we are talking about 10,000 buses on the ground, right? And some of the concerns by lender, which Deepakji kind of just mentioned about, let's say technology risk or maybe the on-ground performance, right? Some of these things would have been a thing of past. If 2 years we would have had 5,000 buses on the ground, I don't think so we would have been talking about this. Either we would have been convinced on this point, or we would have kind of made the relevant changes in the technology, right? So again, coming back to the point that we have, in order to build the scale, we need to make a concession agreement and a counterparty and a payment risk mechanism such a way that it becomes scalable for a lot of new players in the industry.
So, Mr. Shiva, if I could come to you now, Sumit mentioned that counterparty risk, and even Deepak also mentioned the same thing, that counterparty risk remains a key issue here. Now, whenever we talk to fleet operators in India, Delhi is given as an example where things have really worked out very well. And DMITS is known for making timely payments, etc. So in your experience, what do you think has gone well, and is there an opportunity for other states to also replicate the same model?
I think before EVs, many places CNG and other models are working. And I think there are a lot of successful models. We have seen hundreds of our buses running in Madhya Pradesh, where the collection pattern is very good. So there are a lot of examples and where the collection is good. And overall, the situation I see, I think this COVID may be an exception. Leave this case. I think in general, the collection pattern is good. And what you mentioned by Mr. Jain, if you tie up properly with an escrow account, I think things are moving much better than what they used to be. I think in this particular aspect of it, if you look at progress in last 5 years per se, for not EVs, even in other models like CNG or even diesel buses also, I see there is a good amount of progress happened in terms of overall health of this particular thing. So I don't see this as a huge challenge going forward.
Okay.
Samsher, I would just like to add to it in terms of DIMS, your specific question on DIMS. Actually, DIMS is a joint venture between IDFC and Government of Delhi. Right? Yeah. So what again it talks about is like a public and a private partnership, which is the implementing agencies for these buses in Delhi. Right? And they've been able to manage the process and the system in such a manner that there is a prompt payment, and which has made DIMS an STU of choice for most of the operators in the country. Right? So I think there is always a scope where there is certain part of operations can be looked as a partnership along with the private parties, right? Like IDFC is a case in point, right? To kind of improve the specific functioning of some of these units.
And this also, like Sumit, you mentioned earlier, was the fact that if we draw a parallel from the renewable sector, having a centralized body like SECI will also, I think, go a long way. And if we can, that could possibly be a low-hanging fruit if we look at the electric segment as such. So yeah.
And I think with CESL being identified as a nodal agency, I think the platform is set. I think now it's just a matter of how do the regulators and the authorities, including CESL, decides to kind of maybe tail it properly so as to provide a payment comfort, right? Because that will essentially provide the comfort which is required for not just the lenders. I want to just also point out one thing. As a country, we have 20 lakh buses, right? But the number of institutional players in the sector are absolutely minimal, right? I can just confidently say that apart from us being the institutional player in this sector, there are hardly any institutional players in the sector. Right? The moment these payment comforts are there, not just the lenders will get comfortable, but a lot of investors who are flushed with liquidity and looking at opportunities to enter the sector will come into the play. Right? And with more and more investments, it will create better technology, better adoption, and efficiencies will come into the sector.
I think that's a fair point. I think once many of the risks have been identified and some risk mitigation strategies are put in place, funding is unlikely to be an issue for the sector. Mr. Srinivas, if I could come to you now, FAME 2 policy has recently been extended by another 2 years, and it aims to cover about 7,000 odd buses. Question is, what happens after the subsidy goes away? Do you think that over a period of next 3 to 5 years, will bus prices actually fall to a level where they will make economic sense on their own and not rely on capital subsidies?
See, so the purpose of subsidy was to make sure that it will handhold for some time and someone has to take care from there onwards. So that was the very purpose of the subsidy, and all of us understand this. So a lot of things will happen in and around. If you just look at the bus per se, there are three things. The components which are common with the current diesel technology, and there are components which are exclusive for EV, and third is the battery, probably. So which is the lion's share is taken by them. So the parts. So in my view, what's going to happen is, as mentioned by Mr. Mittal also, a lot of sectors will evolve. Like, give an example to you, when we talk to some of the school buses and some of the staff buses, what they say is every day we hardly run 70-80 kilometers.
Right.
No, in one side is 40-50 kilowatt. Why do you need a battery of 200 kilowatt? We wanted to charge it both the sides. Maybe in the night we charge it when they are parked, and when the school also typically it is parked while students are taught. No, during the daytime that they are not being used. They said that you please come up with a frugal solution. So India is known for frugal innovation, and a lot of startups are working in and around this. Just I feel with my own experience of a lot of CMVRs implemented in the past, and BS 1, 2, 3, and several things. I think in some of the areas, India will actually show the path to the world also. I think we'll not only do innovation here, and we'll export these solutions to outside the world. So because we don't think in a very traditional manner, we think unique. And second thing was, we will actually customize solutions to suit to that city, that solution, that sector. So my opinion, these numbers of buses, as mentioned by Mr. Mittal also, the 7,000 numbers may not decide the whole country. They're probably maybe the torchbearer to start with. So, but there will be a lot of things in and around will mushroom, and they will evolve, and they will stand on its own. Probably this will continue even after subsidy. I think a lot of new demand will come. And my opinion, this is a good start, and it will go. I think it will flourish on its own way.
Sure. Sumit, your thoughts on this? Like, after the SRTU segment, there are opportunities now coming up in the private intercity segment as well, as you had mentioned earlier. So what are your thoughts on various segments of the bus market in India? And do you kind of agree with Shruti's presentation that, that's how it is going to pan out?
So, yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree in terms of the point which Mr. Srinivas said. So it depends on the usage, right? Intercity segment is the most profitable because, the daily usage is 500 odd kilometers plus, right? And hence, because the running cost is low, that is why they are the first on the track in terms of which do not require subsidies to kind of, they will be self-sustainable in terms of intercity operations, right? But if we come to the bus segment, right, and I can just point out a number that the total number of buses in the school segment is 3 times that of the buses which are there in STU, right, pan India, right? So it's a huge segment that we're talking about, right? And maybe by frugal engineering, or maybe customization, or maybe through some subsidies, right? A lot of schools are ready to pay a little extra to offer a clean solution for the kids, right? So I think that is a segment which clearly needs focus. Similarly, there are areas like B2B buses, like the corporate buses, which is also a large segment which has got an adoption potential. I feel that just a 7,000 subsidy from the government might not be sufficient given the total size of the market. We have a 60,000 crore bus business in the country, right? From a revenue terms, right? We have 20 lakh buses in the country. In China, after 10 years of adoption, we have reached to almost 4.4 lakhs, as Shruti pointed out in her presentation. So clearly, we have to reach to a critical mass before the subsidies are let go, right? So I think it should allow the top 10 centers or top 15 centers, very similar to what China did, at least a 20-25% adoption to electric vehicle before it is let loose, right? I think there is a huge amount of saving which the government has, because majority of the fuel cell, majority of the ICE buses rely on imported petroleum products, right? Which kind of is a huge drag to the economy. Right? Whereas our grid is moving towards cleaner renewable energy power sources, right? Yeah, we have touched almost 25% of grid composition, which is now renewable fuel, right? So clearly, I think the government is going to save much more than what it provides as subsidy. So I think this subsidy should continue till the time a critical mass is achieved. Having said that, there are certain segments which were excluded as of now because the focus was more towards the STUs. That should be included to kind of really catalyzes the growth of this segment.
Sure. So, before we move to, questions that we've come from the audience, Deepak, let me ask you one last question. What do you think as, the possibility of including electric vehicles as a private sector lending in India? Do you think that can be a game changer?
Are you talking about private sector?
Sorry, priority sector.
Priority sector lending.
Priority sector.
See, priority sector lending obviously is always welcome for any sunrise industry, since lenders are not so keen in providing finance to any new industry. So if there is a regulatory push in the form of a mandate from RBI to give funds to a particular sector, that will definitely help. So it will be a welcome step from the government and RBI if EV financing is included in the priority sector.
Okay. And any thoughts on green bonds, funding through that channel? Do you think that can also be a magic wand for the sector?
Yeah, basically, see, green bonds, this bond market generally doesn't take the construction risk. So bond market basically look into the certainty of the cash flows. So projects where construction has already happened and there is a history of 1 to 2 years and cash flows are very much visible. So obviously some of this debt will go to bonds, as we are currently seeing in renewals. Initially, it was only bank funding which was happening. But right. Now you could see every other day, all big groups are going to bond market and getting their commissioned asset refinanced in the bond market. But I think in this EV space, since I think not many projects have been commissioned and we are still in policy formulation phase and debating on the format of the concession agreement. So it is a bit too early in this sector actually to go to bond market. But once the sector develops and there are good number of commission assets, since the cash flow visibility and certainty is there in the form of annuity payments in GCC model, this will be a right place for bond market. But let us hold for some period of time before venturing into green bonds.
Yeah. I think still too early to perhaps go that.
Just one point I wanted to add here, maybe the payment security mechanism that we are talking about will also be a catalyst to this change of green bond, because majority of the investors in the green bond are sovereign and long-term pension funds kind of investors, which is a separate class, which not only wants to kind of keep away from construction risk, but also wants to keep away from payment risk. So if you see majority of the green bonds have been kind of, in the sectors where the payment risks are also very less, right? So if we have slightly credit enhanced counterparties, right, it will further enhance more lenders or more bond issuers to come into the market. See, the idea should be that we should create a ecosystem where more and more investment comes into the sector, right? That's the only recipe for growth of the sector. That can only happen if the risks are identified and mitigated, and this will not even just allow lenders to come in, but also will allow more and more investors to come into the sector.
Right. Yeah, Shamsher, regarding this counterparty raise, I think this has been already discussed threadbare so far. But I think I heard that in the new concession agreement, they are talking about government guarantee or the state government guarantee. So if that happens, that will be a big step forward to provide some kind of comfort to not only the lenders, but all the new investors which may enter in this market. But other than state government guarantee, there could be, as already been spoken about, there could be a national level, national mobility company or something like that. Like in road sector, we have NHAI. So if the concession agreement is actually taking payment risk on NHAI, which is a AAA rated company. But here all the entities will be in sub-investment grade, so that is a problem. So either there should be a very strong payment mechanism through government guarantee and access to cash. See, sometimes even state government guarantee doesn't satisfy very risk-averse lenders because they need to see the cash and from where resources will come in case there's a shortfall. So it should be backed by either a provision in the state budget, or there should be recourse to some form of liquid cash which is getting generated continuously in the state machinery. So if we have recourse to that particular source of cash and somehow build it in the risk mitigation mechanism, then lenders will come forward and more new investors will also feel safe, and probably we will see green bonds soon.
Sure. I think one example could be Uttar Pradesh, where they have dedicated 2% of total stamp duty collections towards e-mobility. So I think something of that sort you're referring to.
Yeah, that is a step in the right direction. They have allocated some portion of their stamp duty collection for urban development, and part of it will go towards payments to these escrow accounts. Right. But this again, see, it's a gazette notification. It's a very good first step, but it needs to be institutionalized, and mechanism should be there in place that in case there is a shortfall in cash, then the money will be available when it is needed. Because there is a speed at which government machinery acts, and there are very stringent asset recognition norms of RBI. So if you do not receive money within 90 days, it becomes a NPA. So a lender cannot wait beyond 90 days, and the governments take their own time to act. So there should be some ready cash available, or some mechanism should be institutionalized so that cash is available whenever needed. But that is a very good step, and it should be that concept should be developed.
Sure. I'll now request Srikumar to maybe take up some questions from the Q&A chat box. I think we have a lot of questions. So Srikumar.
Thanks. We have quite ranging from demand expectation, charging infrastructure. There are some questions on safety as well as on financing. Charging infrastructure. Maybe for Srinivas, if I can ask you. The question is with regard to the standardization of charging infrastructure across countries, and also the kind of incentive system that is available for the charging infrastructure system in India.
Sorry, Shukumar, I could not follow you properly, but
yeah.
Sorry.
The question is
who are the charging suppliers? I could read from there. Is it right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So there are many, but I don't want to take anyone. There are maybe Charge Zone, Parade, Magenta for charging infra, and there are several for Exicom and others for chargers. I think it's an evolving thing. Probably today we are talking about a few numbers, so there will be a lot of people who are coming in this segment. So.
Sure. And there is a question with regard to the pros and cons of battery swapping versus plug-in charging models, and how does our standards of battery swapping compare with the developed markets?
See, there's a question there is which is a better technology. It is too early to comment on which is the better technology, because I think something will evolve and the best will be there. Probably many things will coexist also. No, so but however, what it appears right now is maybe the plug-in one appears to be more popular, the way the number of cars and other things are being done. But I'm not ruling out battery swapping. Maybe one of the challenge in the battery swapping can be the customer thinks he owns the battery, and when he gives it and takes something new, he has an apprehension of the changeover. But otherwise, I think at this point of time, we can't rule out anything. We can't say this is the best one and the other one is not all that great. But globally, at this point of time, appears to be the plug-in appears to be the mostly followed in cars and the commercial vehicles and other areas also.
Great. Maybe I can move on to Mr. Sumit on the demand front. In our presentation as well, we covered the fact that the total number of bus sales in FY21, we have managed to achieve that in the first 4 months of this year itself. While we talk about a penetration of 8 to 10% by FY25, there is a question with regard to the near-term demand. How do you see the demand for e-buses in the private sector segment, specifically in the coming months, and especially with the fact that there are more players entering the market, and there is an improved demand in the corporate transportation and office staff transport, etc. What should be an expectation on the demand front specifically in the next few months or 1 to 2 years, if you can guide us?
So the current orders which are under various stages of implementation into the FAME 2 is around 3,200 odd buses, right? And we are expecting a bulk of it will get implemented from September till March, right? Because of pandemic, a lot of these projects have kind of got extended, but now they are in a very advanced stages of deployment, right? So majority of the deployment or the sales, when it gets registered as per the records of ROC, will happen in the next 6 months, and I'm sure that all of us will be pleasantly surprised by the total number of buses that we will have by the end of financial year. Right? But this is all FAME 2 government STU buses, right? Currently, there are, to best of my knowledge, there is not a single player except us who have kind of ventured out in the private bus market, right? So we plan to deploy around 250 buses by March and around 750 buses across the next 6 to 12 months across the country in the intercity business. Right? But we have not heard about any other player who have kind of initiated this business so far. And as Mr. Srinivasan has suggested that there has been a lot of discussion over the school buses and the corporate buses which is happening, but not really a product which kind of works for at the total cost of ownership has been kind of launched so far. But I'm very confident that the moment that comes out, there will be a lot of adoption which can happen in that. Just to point out one more thing regarding the chargers, India has actually done a right step towards adoption of the norms of CCS2 chargers, right? So we have already standardized our charger requirement, right? So that there is uniformity in terms of all the charging protocols, right? And all the chargers will have fungibility of using it across the vehicles, right? As we go, so we will not end up in a situation where certain buses will not be able to use certain chargers, or the cars will not be able to use certain chargers. So I think that's a step in the right direction, which the policymakers have already done in terms of the chargers.
Great. Great. I think I can move to Mr. Deepak, sir. With regard to the financing aspect, two questions, sir. Like one, in your project appraisal, what do you see as a typical break-even period for these projects? And secondly, what are the kind of credit enhancements that could be done, apart from your DSRA or liquidity buffers, basically?
Yeah, basically, while evaluating an infrastructure project, lenders generally look for ratios like debt service coverage ratio, DSCR, and IRRs. So it all depends on the cash flows of the project, but generally these projects are short gestation period projects, so construction risk is not there, and the time overrun and cost overrun risks are also quite minimal. And the assured payments are there through annuity model in GCC. So there is good amount of certainty of cash also. So the only risk is the payment risk or the technological risk to some extent. So therefore, given the, in comparison to other projects where risks are much higher, so lenders here may live with lower level of DSCRs vis-a-vis other projects. But if you ask me, though there are no written down norms as of now for this sector, but 1.2 to 1.25 DSCR should be a decent DSCR for this particular sector to begin with. Regarding credit enhancement, see, DSRA obviously is one tool to capture some amount of cash, and in case there are temporary shortfalls in the cash flows, then some amount of cushion could be derived from DSRA. But we generally try to control risk by using a blend of project financing and a limited recourse. See, though the demand of all the promoters, I think, always has been to go for as much non-recourse as possible, but ultimately it's a very fine balancing act which needs to be done. And we need to see the risk of the project and then somehow take a call about how much of the financing could be recourse or non-recourse. So far, not many deals have happened in this market. So there is a fear among banking community, and people will generally like to go in for a recourse financing. And even if not full recourse, some amount of limited recourse could be a very good credit enhancement for first few cases in the sector. Other than that, we can increase the amount of, since the first and foremost risk which has come out in this discussion is the counterparty risk. So we could think of enhancing the DSRA amount also. So depending on the strength of the payment mechanism and the strength of the party who is going to make the payment, this DSRA amount can also be enhanced. and there could be some guarantees from the promoter to make good the deficit in case there are delays in payments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can move to Srinivas, sir. This is a question on technology again, like, with regard to the expectation on transitioning. Can all the CNG buses be transitioned to EVs by 2030s, and especially in metros like Delhi and Bombay? Very wishful question.
Probably I mentioned, I think all these technologies will coexist. Even look at diesel today, I think in BS6, the best clean fuel being used, and but there are so many sensors. In terms of technology, I think a lot of electronification happened in diesel also. Similarly, CNG, and I feel that whether it's diesel, CNG, LNG, or EVs, they'll all coexist based on the merit of the commercial merit of the whole system, unless and until there is any legislation which is restricting particular city and particular application. Otherwise, it is absolutely, because I think most of it is on the commercial usage and the purpose is B2B. So I don't think anyone will pinpoint one particular technology for the sake of it. So and all these technologies will also walk towards providing the best green solutions to the world. So in my view, it is the merit of the technology rather than any other thing at that point of time.
Got it. One other question is regarding the fuel. Basically, Government of India has started focusing on green hydrogen and biofuels as transport fuels, which could be better than battery operated EVs. So the question is, like, do EVs have to compete with these technologies as well going forward?
Yes, that's what I said earlier also. I think this is the starting of maybe the new way of looking things. Probably a lot of things will evolve in this area also. I think traditionally, globally, people have a certain way of looking things, like you say that intercity buses, intracity buses, short haul and long haul trucks. So there is a different things going to evolve. I would like to also add here, I think we are talking about in a bus context, but otherwise overall today in a good scenario, around 70 to 80,000 buses are sold in this country, whereas we sell about 1 million of trucks. And we sell about 30 million, maybe 3 million cars, maybe huge number of two-wheelers. So the suppliers and the solution providers are common in few areas. Hence, we have a huge scale. Like today also, we have a lot of parts common between trucks and buses. And a lot of suppliers are common between trucks, buses, cars, and two-wheelers. So when you look at that, I think the solutions which are going to emerge, they are going to be unique in nature and also common in certain areas. Probably that scale is there in this country, which is actually quite natural to take this thing to in a very innovative and a frugal manner.
Okay. On the outlook part, sir, like, we guided on the penetration part. Would you agree with this kind of number in terms of estimations?
It is very difficult to mention now, I think, the percentage of it. However, as mentioned, probably, in fact, someone was approaching me also. So I think the merit of the whole thing is moving in a much better manner.
Okay.
So on standalone basis, there are, like, we're talking about two cities which can be connected very well, and the commercial viability is reasonably good and even much better than any other solution. That's what I could see. If such solutions are there, like the way I mentioned about a school bus or a staff bus or any other thing, probably yes. But I would like to also remind, other technologies also will catch up. What they will do is some kind of innovation will happen. It is not a one-dimensional exercise. It is a multi-dimensional, because there will be a lot of innovation will happen in other areas also. Hence, what will happen is a continuous, very healthy and a constructive competition. And I think we need to wait and watch what's going to happen.
Right. And what kind of margins do you see, once we achieve the maturity level of the industry?
Margins for whom? Operators, you're saying?
Yeah.
I think operator margins will remain same. They will be in the same level for any other thing. No, I think the stress will be on OEMs compared with anyone else in this whole thing. So because OEMs have to adopt or they have to invent a technology, wherein I think we'll be much closer to any other solution. So that's where the crux of the matter lies. Because you can't transfer, like for example, the the person who is traveling in a bus, will he pay more just because it is EV or it is a CNG or it is LNG? He'll pay same. So the next person is the operator. I think there are certain expenses. Will you pay less or more because it is an EV bus to a driver? Probably it is not possible. So I think that the OEMs have to come forward, and OEMs definitely will come forward. They will innovate. They'll work with various people, and the cost levels will come down with the help of suppliers and the supply chain ecosystem.
Great. One last question to Sumit, sir. There is a question on the safety issues, especially with media articles on a row of buses catching fire, catching fire over there. How do you see the safety related challenges in India?
I feel that these buses are technologically very advanced, electric buses, as compared to what we see as traditionally the diesel buses or the CNG buses they were there. I think these are technically advanced buses. There are some 53 parameters which are tracked in the buses on the real time, and these reports are available at the central control room. There's a lot of predictive maintenance which happens on the buses, right? So clearly, from a maintenance perspective, I don't think so there is any gap. We are definitely much ahead. Electric buses are much ahead than the ICE counterparts in that manner. In terms of safety of the battery, which is a differentiating part between the ICE buses and the electric buses, I think that the majority of the players in India are using either the LFP or LMO kind of battery, right? So these batteries are tried and tested with 8-10 years of performance history in China, right? It could lead to a situation where the efficiency is marginally up and down depending on the climatic conditions and the road conditions, but unlikely a thermal runaway kind of a situation to happen, right? So I am not really very concerned, while this remains a critical aspect for public utility, because we are transporting human lives, right? So there are adequate and more safety measures, including the proper fire hydrants and other things which are installed in the bus and ensure the safety is there. And we are very confident that it should be only able to improve the overall safety of the travelers as compared to the existing options.
Thank you, sir. It has been a real pleasure in having you all for this webinar. On behalf of ICRA, we would like to thank you sincerely for taking your time out and sharing your valuable insights on the industry, especially being a sunshine industry. And in this challenging environment, these kind of insights are certainly valuable to everyone. Thanks again. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all for participating in this event, sir. Good day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Great work, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Deepak.
Thank you.